Welcome to the Cybersecurity and Cloud Podcast, the podcast where we learn from cybersecurity experts how to stay safe, private, and secure on the cloud and in code. CSCP is hosted by Francesco Cipollone, your cybersecurity friend with a passion for all things cyber and sharing stories of other professionals with you. Let's dive in.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cybersecurity and Cloud Podcast. This is your host Francesco, and today we have the absolute pleasure to have on board and on the podcast a friend, a fellow startup, and somebody that is really making the difference into the cybersecurity space, into the startup space, breaking the barriers. So I have Jonathan Slater, the co-founder of Capslock, together with Lorna and Andrea. They are changing the way people are learning and getting into this cyberspace. So it was really, really important for me to bring you on board so that everybody can hear the Capslock story. So, Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here. Super excited.
So maybe you can tell our audience, a little bit about your background, your story. How did you stumble across this kind of crazy project that you started and successful?
Yes, background, very entrepreneurial, from sort of, selling chewing gum at school through to making hair ties and selling hair ties on eBay at university to pay for nights out, etc. Through to then, co-founded a business called My Horsebox, which is in the equestrian sector. Throughout that time, I was always a freelance recruitment consultant, so really good understanding of the cybersecurity labour market. So I used to work with candidates and employer partners to place those together. And at that point, really had saw the labour market and the struggles employers were going through to hire talent. Basically, the skills gap has been growing and growing. At the flip side, there was educational models in the USA. So, for example, Lambda School, using something called an income share agreement to try and break down barriers for everybody to access career-changing education. So really at that point, the idea started to sort of come together for Capslock in terms of how can we take people who are at risk of career redundancy or at a stage in their lives where they want to change. And that can be someone coming out of university, coming from their A-levels, or someone who's, in their 50s who just wants to change career or is facing redundancy. How can we help those people reskill and at the same time contribute to closing that skills gap? So when we were thinking about that sort of inclusivity, diversity, helping people from all backgrounds came to mind, and that's really sort of where the idea originated in terms of career-changing education without the red tape of university structures, etc., and alongside an innovative finance model like an income share agreement where there's no upfront costs. Instead, people pay on success when they graduate. So anyway, I spoke to Lorna and Andrea, who were friends at the time, sort of banded this idea together. They completely changed it to make it feasible, and then at that point we became co-founders. And it's been an amazing journey over the last 2 years. I'd love to talk about it, talk about Capslock and the things we've discovered and the outcomes and all the learnings we can give to industry. So yeah, that's kind of my story in a nutshell, really.
No, that's great, and I think that the income agreement helps breaking for real the barrier, not just talking about breaking the barrier and reducing the skill gap. Now, maybe from that aspect, what do you think the main problems on the educational sectors are, and what do you think the state of the industry is right now?
Yeah, so I mean, thinking about the state of the industry, our knowledge is within education, skills, and sort of diversity. So we'll talk about those things. And by 2023, there's going to be around 100,000 cybersecurity jobs unfilled. That includes cyber-enabled roles as well. So if you think of a cybersecurity vendor, project managers, they need cybersecurity experience, for example. So that's the skills gap we're looking at trying to tackle. In terms of education, right now we think traditional higher education not suitable for the workplace. You look at university graduates coming out, they're going to need 6, 9, 12 months to get up to speed and add value to an organization before they even become billable. And then on the flip side, we've got the diversity and inclusivity aspect as well, and that really comes down to the gender gap. So within cyber, about 16% are women, and that percentage becomes lower when you look at the more technical roles or more senior roles. So again, that's something we're really passionate about trying to fix. So the state for us at the moment is, there's going to be a very big reskilling transition as careers change, as businesses become digitized and risk management turns into cybersecurity. We're going to see a big shift, and people needed to reskill. So you think of software developers, cybersecurity, AI, machine learning, sec DevOps, etc. These are all sectors where we're struggling with skills gaps, and at the same time you've got a ream of tens of millions of people who need to reskill in the next 10 years. So there's an opportunity there, right, to take people who have got workplace experience, reskill them and bring them into areas like cybersecurity. In terms of education, I guess Lorna and Andrea, they co-authored and designed one of the first master's degrees for Bradford University back in 2004. Mm-hmm. And just to change the name from Internet Communication System Security to Cybersecurity took 2.5 years to go through that process, right? And by then, the So we're really in a position where we bring the best of the rigor of higher education. They do things right sometimes, but mix that with sort of the agility and the leanness of being a startup, being able to deliver education without any barriers or red tape.
No, and I think that's great. That's smashing the barriers and bringing innovation and bringing the agility and speed on a sector that is, changing consistently. It's changing faster than normally university can adapt, and university red tape, as you rightfully say, can bring. But maybe in the most, you mentioned maybe 2 or 3 kind of skills, AI, DevSecOps, engineering. Maybe in those fields, what have you seen in terms of demand from the market? And on the flip side, what are the challenges in getting into these kind of topics overall?
Yeah, I think, whenever we speak to employer partners, cybersecurity is absolutely a massive issue they need to solve, but they always say software engineers, software developers, data scientists. The problems are always the same, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just this shift. Whenever new markets emerge, new technologies emerge, as we get further into this digital revolution, education always takes time to catch up. So you think back into the 60s, 70s with the industrial revolution, education takes maybe 10, 15 years to get to the point where it can produce people who can go into these lines of work. So we're at this point right now where education is trying to catch up. You've got the private sector like Capslock, for example, try to solve the problem. And you've got a lot of pressure on universities now being, you're not preparing people for the modern workplace. It's time to catch up. But, modern workplace, so tech orientated, for some people and for some organizations, it's really difficult to make that transition.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what we think at the minute in terms of the education sector. In terms of the specifics they need, the tech skills are really important, but actually what we see is the soft skills as well. So when we say soft skills, we mean like impact skills, so problem solving, critical thinking. If you look at the World Economic Forum in terms of the top 10 skills employers need, it's those skills like problem solving, critical thinking, working in a team effectively, being able to communicate written and spoken English. Those are really important. And all of our employers, that's like a prerequisite. So some might have really deep technical requirements, but without the soft impact skills, again, you're not going to be able to be effective in a workplace. So that's sort of another area we're focused on as well.
And not highly paid. So I think I love what you just said, because I always go back to Daniel Carnegie and saying, if you can learn anything, but if you want to excel at something, then those are the soft skills, the human skill, the interpersonal skills, and the ability or learning how to learn, that is the important things. And I like that you touch on that aspect, because traditionally, the cybersecurity is a very technical field, and we've been asked as techies to only focus on, solving tech. But 90% of the problem in cyber are human related. And we're preparing a generation of people that are not able to deal with the human.
Absolutely agree. We've seen a lot of other initiatives who try to tackle this problem, some successfully, some without. But, the way we think about cyber is, process people tech or people process tech. Tech is really important and it can help in a lot of regards. But, like you said, 90% of the time, it all comes back to that layer 8 problem, right? The human sat behind the keyboard. So, the way we teach is thinking about sort of everything's underpinned by risk and risk management. As businesses have digitized, that risk has become cybersecurity effectively. That's how we think about it. And that people process side, a lot of education, cybersecurity education specifically, is missing that out. So how can you teach people, how to create an effective cybersecurity culture? It's a really difficult thing to teach. How can you teach people about how to present MI metrics to a board, for example, when you're part of a cybersecurity team? Super important, right? Many CISOs listening to this will know that, the way you present to a board or the way you act to the board might have an effect on your budget next year, for example. So these are all things we think about and teach as well. And we think they're super, super important in the future of work, right?
No, no, and I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. But maybe back on that mindset, the soft skill, how do you see maybe us bringing diversity and trying to smash fundamentally the barriers that, technical roles are traditionally just thought to be for one specific gender, one specific type of people? How do we encourage, first of all, people from different background, different gender, different mindset to get on board, and then second of all, how we modify fundamentally the industry? I know those are very
Mm.
hard questions that nobody has one answer to, but let's try to talk about it.
Yeah, we nearly got an answer to it. We think we're doing well on it. I mean, like when you think of gender diversity in tech, it's a systemic societal problem we need to solve. So let's start at the beginning in terms of like school, computer science being on the curriculum. Girls being encouraged to take that path. Parents not unconsciously or unconscious biasly affecting their children because of their gender in terms of pushing in certain directions. That's right at a sort of deeper societal level. Things need to change. On the flip side, as a cybersecurity sector, what we can do is use more inclusive language, just be aware of some unconscious biases. And I'll tell you about a study we did. So obviously 3 co-founders at Capslock, myself, Lorna Armitage and Dr. Andrea Cullen. Lorna and Andrea, super experienced, far more experienced than I am. Now, what we noticed when we were going to meetings, external meetings with investors, cybersecurity employers, suppliers, and so on, is that when we spoke to people, they always said my name more than Lorna and Andrea's for some reason. Even when we're going in as equal co-founders, when we've prepped them before the meeting, the questions always came to me as the least experienced person on the team, and we believed it was down to unconscious bias. So we started to try and measure this. So what we measured was how many people say our individual names and sort of made a tally of how many people say Jonathan, Lorna, or Andrea. It turns out that around 85% of the time people said my name compared to Lorna and Andrea's. And they're two industry professionals, and people like talking about cybersecurity curriculum and even like Lorna and Andrea's ideas and just pointing the questions at me, which was really, really interesting. So anyway, we published this study and it's done really, really well. So I think as a man in cybersecurity, I think, 84% of people listening to this podcast will be male, is just be aware of those unconscious biases. And whoever's in the meeting, whatever level, whatever gender, just make sure they're included, right? If I'm taking a team member to a meeting, I don't want people addressing just me because that team member is there for a reason. It doesn't matter what role they do. So just be aware that everybody in the meeting needs to be addressed, really. So that's what we can do as a collective, is just be aware of this. Initiatives just for women, they're super important, right? Because right now women need extra equity or extra opportunity to catch up because they're so underrepresented and affected in that regard. So when you think of like a women-only cohort or Cyber First for Women, which GCHQ run, for example, or companies doing women-only training programs, or just make sure that people are aware of the problem and actively try and solve it, is going to be a really important step to make.
This episode is brought to you by the generosity of AppSec Phoenix Ltd. AppSec helps startups and enterprises solve complex software security problems by using smart data aggregation and complex machine learning software. Discover how AppSec Phoenix helps CISO and developers remove friction and maximize the use of DevSecOps professionals at www.appsecphoenix.com. AppSec Phoenix is the new and smart dev-first way to manage your software vulnerability. Follow the tag #AppSecSmart.
Those are fantastic, actionable example and real use case and real case scenarios that I had a female co-founder and I found exactly the same thing. I'm Italian, so I tend to speak like there is no tomorrow. So that might be unconscious bias, but conscious conscious speaking disorder. But that's a secondary problem. But absolutely, I totally agree with you. But maybe a little bit of a thing that I always had is, aren't we not with adding fundamentally quota and shares and starting this fundamentally woman-only program? Aren't we falling into danger of saying, oh, you got the place just because you're a woman, or you got into that opportunity just because you're a woman? It's a bit of a controversial thing, and been speaking out on this because I don't think there is an answer. But what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think if you look at society right now, men they have not an advantage, but they're not disadvantaged.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas women can be disadvantaged, and there is so much research about that proving that that's the case, right? So when you think of if you run specific initiatives for women, does it disadvantage men? Not really, because they're not initially disadvantaged. What you try to do is level that playing field, right? So if you're taking away, let's say, men might think you're taking away an opportunity for them, but what you're actually doing is trying to level that playing field and making sure women have just the right opportunity, the same opportunity as men as well in the sector. And there's so much research out there in terms of society that there is that unconscious bias, or not even unconscious all the time, in terms of sexism. So yeah, I get where you're coming from with that argument. It's not your argument, it's an argument you hear all the time.
Yeah, it's an industry argument.
Yeah.
And maybe back
leveling the playing field. Yeah.
No, I like the idea, and I think it's there is no right answer. It's a controversial argument. Is a fact that change. It's the society trying to change it, trying to do better, but there will be always like friction and constraint point and evolution and growth pain. But maybe I want to circle back also on the diversity subject, considering you have a wide cohort of people that come from different background, different gender, different, cultural difference. How are you finding that kind of mix encourage the learning versus the more elite, maybe school, where, you traditionally find just one gender or one specific background? Have you seen, what are the stories or the positive or maybe negative as well thing that you saw?
Yeah, so if you think of education right now, if you want to go to university, what they're really good at is measuring IQ. So what score did you get in your A levels, right? But there's so much more to measuring someone's potential than just measuring IQ. So you think of EQ in terms of, social intelligence, emotional intelligence. You think of drive and determination. For us, that's the number one thing. You can have the smartest person in the world, but if they don't have drive and motivation, if they don't have good EQ in terms of impact skills or the willingness to learn those, then it's going to be difficult for that individual. So what we see at Capslock, well, what we do is we reskill adults to become cybersecurity professionals via an intensive training program. And what we wanted to do was make it as inclusive and accessible and affordable for everybody as possible. So what we judge people on is, it doesn't matter where you've been or what your background is. It depends on where you're going. After 16 weeks, do you have the potential to be an entry-level cybersecurity professional? And how do you measure that competency? Is it IT skills? Is it IQ? Is it, coding experience? And actually what we found is it all comes down to that drive and motivation and that willingness to learn. Because if you can work hard for 16 weeks, it is amazing in terms of what you see as results, right? You're learning full-time, 9 to 5 almost. So that's been the biggest indicator for us. So we've had professional dancers, marketing managers, project managers, people from an IT background, policemen, police women, you name it, we've had it on the Capslock program. And there is no correlation in terms of past experience and background in terms of what their outcomes can be. So one of our most successful graduates is a former junior project manager, and alongside that, a former dancer who's gone on to do very, very well. Whereas people from an IT background, what we've seen, a couple of those haven't been quite as successful because of other barriers in their life. And that might come down to those soft impact skills we spoke about before.
Right.
So we measure potential. Do you have the appetite and willingness to go and do it? Now, the way we do education, we use something called team-based learning. So when you're on the course, you go through the course as a team. You're in a team of 4, 5, 6, etc. And that team is super diverse. So you might be, let's say, put you in the shoes as an IT analyst. You might be in a team with a head chef, with a project manager, with an account manager from sales, someone who works in marketing. And actually, when you go out to try and solve problems, so what we do at Capslock is, right, here's a problem, a cybersecurity problem. What skills do you need to be able to solve that problem? Once you have those skills, right, let's apply those and solve this problem.
Right.
So the problems stay the same. The solutions are always best practice, is how we think about this. And when you're working in a team with such diversity of thought, actually the contribution and the way you solve that problem is just amazing. The results we see and the assets and the solutions they come up with are just amazing because of that diversity of thought. So yeah, there's diversity in terms of gender, ethnic minority, etc., but diversity of thought is super, super important as well.
No, I love that training, but maybe on the opposite side, aren't you making your life extremely hard in having these very the advantage of a university has a standard curriculum, a standard exam, and then,
Mm,
you either are in that standard or you're not. And I understand the
yeah.
reason for it, but on the flip side, isn't it extremely complex to maintain a system like that for
What has,
training on problem solving and other softer balance skills?
yeah, like, I mean, like, it's not easy to deliver education like that. And, it's Lauren and Andrea, 15 years in education, absolute experts, written white papers and studies on education, how people learn. So, but we're doing something which is really hard. That's why we think we're, being successful, because this is a problem which is difficult to solve. But what
Right.
is, if you think of something called Bloom's taxonomy in terms of how people learn and how much information they retain, the higher levels in terms of retaining information and being able to apply that new information come from teaching others, come from discussion, deep discussion. But when you and applying that knowledge directly on problems, but when you're listening and when you're reading, you might retain 20% of that knowledge, which is put in
Right.
front of you. So when it's lecture based or slide based, you think of those 5-day training courses around certifications. That's what we call rote knowledge in terms of, right, okay, that's that knowledge. It's difficult to remember but when you're working in a team, solving problems, discussing, teaching others, that's when that deeper learning comes and where you can apply the knowledge. So that's what we try to do, set up a program, a reskilling program around absolute cutting edge in terms of how people learn, and being able to do that online. No one else has done it as good as us before, we think, in the world. I think we're world leading in terms of how we deliver the education. So
No,
excited
my
to take
hat
it
to
to
you.
other sectors as well, right?
Yeah, no, my hat to you, because first, let's mention that you started a startup just before the pandemic, so you had to deliver something that is traditionally team learning, and everybody has
Mm,
struggled enormously to keep the team focused. And you had schools, you had
yeah,
other teams, so congratulations for starting a very successful business on that journey in a very difficult time.
yeah.
But maybe how did you keep the attention and the focus high where other organizations or other schools have traditionally failed and given up on, we're just going to deliver a blob of information and then it's up to you to retain it.
Well, exactly right. So I guess we can use some of our stats here. So we have a retention rate of 96%. So someone enrolls, they're 96% of the time going to complete the course. If you compare that to university or other boot camps, they're in the 70, 80%. So like the way we teach is super engaging. People want to be there. Team-based learning is amazing. You're in a team for 16 weeks. The friendships you make and the journey you
Yes.
go on with that team is immense and really contributes to retention. At a flip side, we've got the outcomes and the support in place. The support here is amazing. So like education, career changing education can be really hard, especially when it's intensive. So having a good support structure around that's super, super important. And that's what maximizes retention rate as well. So you think of mental health first aiders, you think of career support, you think of professional coaching. These are all things you need to include to have really, really good outcomes.
No, that's brilliant. And maybe in terms of the curriculum that you cover, what curriculum have you find to be kind of that right mix that enable people to then jump off into the next level of role, or what role right now you prepare?
Yeah. So what we wanted to do, because cybersecurity is so complex, right? It's quite rare actually. You're in quite a siloed role in cybersecurity. So what we've done is think people, process, tech, and we've broken down into a number of problem areas. So high level, we start off with understanding business. Why does cybersecurity exist and how does that fit in? Think about security culture, MI metrics, onboarding an employee. How do you do that in a way which is, supportive of a good cybersecurity culture? That's a problem which people are struggling to solve. And then we go into security by design. So thinking about sort of risk management underpins everything on our curriculum, even when we get to the use of technology parts,
Thank
cloud
you.
infrastructure. Yeah.
Finally, somebody that says risk in cybersecurity are the same thing.
Well, it's everything, isn't it? That's why it exists. And people often forget that. I'm sure many CISOs are going to be happy to hear that right now. We do security by design, so networking fundamentals in there as well. And then sort of we go into applied security, so even touching on things like applied cryptography, for example. I can't even say it, it's that difficult. Then we go to access control, IAM, PAM, etc. Super important nowadays. So looking at things like Access Directory and so on. We go into offensive, defensive security operations. So, both very tied in together. And what you start to see at this point as you move through the curriculum is the things you learned in the first 2 or 3 weeks start to overlap. So when you come to thinking about cloud cloud security, everything you've learned about risk management or networking fundamentals comes into play. So it's kind of like a spider web, and it's this scaffolding approach. So anyway, we touch on offensive, so we look at SOC and offensive security. But when we think about those things, we're doing it from a point of risk management. Why do clients and companies need these services, and what we're doing here? How do you write a report, and so on? And then we wrap everything up with business continuity and incident response. So in that business continuity and business resilience piece, you use everything you've learned from the last 14 weeks and tie it into one big sort of, not project, but one area where everything comes into account. And alongside that, they'll do some professional certifications as well.
CISP. Everybody coming up on the CSSP. Sorry, I had to throw that. Who doesn't know the CISP?
Yeah. ISC Squared are doing some good stuff. They're bringing out an entry-level cybersecurity certificate. I think it was in beta mode Q4 last year. So we're excited to see what that looks like.
No, and I think CSP is traditionally bashed. And for who doesn't know, CSP is traditional doomsday certification that is like tons books of exam, 6-hour exams, and very expensive to maintain also going forward. But I think what I like to break on the CSP, and then circling back on your curriculum, is that breadth of views that traditionally we tend to forget in cyber. So cyber tend to be very faceted and very multidisciplinary field, and we tend to forget that by just choosing, the pen testing, the SOC team. Those tend to be maybe the 2 or 3 things that we saw everywhere, and maybe it's because they're the more lucrative and easy to learn. But without the basis, then you don't have the agility to move around the organization, and then you get stuck in that role. So I really appreciate the fact that you give that risk sense and that breadth of view, so that after that it kind of gives you like a trampoline to say, I want to become a pen tester, I want to become a risk assessor, I want to become a cloud security specialist. I love that. And maybe on that subject, are you thinking for maybe later on some specialization courses, or has the market kind of driven you to maybe some more specialized role, or are you going to remain preparing kind of the base of the next cybersecurity generation?
Yeah, I think the problem we're laser focused on solving right now is people at risk of career redundancy and that skills gap. So if you can, build up that early funnel of cybersecurity professionals coming in, they can go on and specialize and help companies in so many different ways. And at the same time, we want a solution which is going to help people, avoid career redundancy. Yeah. So that's what we're focused on. There's a lot of conversation around, once you've graduated, once you're an alumni, if you're a cybersecurity professional, if you're a SOC analyst, for example, what about a dedicated intensive course on information security awareness and how to implement that in an organization? So there's conversations we're having and thinking, but, we're laser focused right now on that bigger problem.
No, I like the laser focus, and that actually brings me back to the startup culture and the startup philosophy, because you brought in a startup in a very traditional field. So how on earth have you decided to do so?
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging, isn't it? It is very education and training has always been very traditional. We were really fortunate that, we decided we're going to build for online delivery. The pandemic hit and everybody was basically forced online. So everybody's been normalized with this way of working, with this way of interacting, which, bodes well for completely online delivery. I think the team is so strong here, the management team, the board around us, the investors around the table, that, we set out a plan for year one in 2021, and we've just been able to execute on that. The demand is there for people who need to reskill, and employers are doing their part as well in terms of taking on people for those junior roles. We've got some great employer partners who are super passionate about this, and we're delighted to work with them and provide a solution to help them. So obviously, being a startup founder, there's loads of challenges and perks and personal development you need to come over, right? But touch wood, it's going super, super well so far.
But no, and how have you, maybe on that startup aspect, have you kept the team kind of laser focused and together? What are the kind of magic tricks that you use, especially in the pandemic? That traditionally startup is like a family that everybody kind of bundles up together and works together. Now that we are in a complete distributed way, and you guys are remote first, how have you kept that idea of bundled up?
Yeah, I think it comes like, as three co-founders right at the beginning, what we wanted to set was a really good culture within the organization. Laura and Andrea left very high-paying jobs to come and earn a lot less and do a lot more work. And what was a fantastic surprise for us over the last year was when we built that culture and what we wanted to achieve for the people who worked, within Capslock was a place of inclusivity, diversity, where you can speak an open mind, where it's okay to make mistakes and so on. And that sort of, there's 14 of us now, and it's an open door. It's really close. People are enjoying it. We're really aware of flexibility and what people need in terms of work-life integration, not just work-life balance, but making sure that both go together really, really well. And in terms of that, just being remote and being able to operate and execute efficiently online is, we're masters of Zoom. Zoom education is what we use to deliver education, but Slack's been great. The whole sort of online working stack, we've spent a lot of time thinking about technology which we might use to bring people closer together. And when you're recruiting, just making sure that the candidates you're speaking to are okay working remotely. And for 50% of the people in the UK, working remotely is an absolute dream come true. Right. For maybe some people it's more difficult, so just making sure people are comfortable in that environment as well.
No, that's great. And maybe back on that subject, how as a founder and as a remote founder, have you kept the team and your mental health up fundamentally? How do you remain sane? What are the tricks and tips?
Being a co-founder or founder has been an amazing journey in personal development. I've been a younger founder, been at a different stage of career than Lorna and Andrew. Been through an amazing journey of personal development. I think mental health is really important. When you found a company, spend a year, try to get the idea off the ground, you spend a year proving the idea, and then you spend a year trying to grow it and scale it, and then next 2 or 3 years you're hoping to grow to some sort of acquisition or exit opportunity. And sort of the responsibilities and pressures on you change throughout that time. First year was great, fine, but I wasn't getting paid. Second year, you're like super excited because you just raised a pre-seed funding round, but then you've got to think about recruitment and all the pains which come from being like a first-time founder and putting process and policy in place. So yeah, it's been really interesting. But the three founders, what we do is we rotate a 4-day working week. So every 3 weeks we get a Friday off, and that really helps.
That's
in
great.
the morning. Yeah, it's been amazing. And at the same time, we try to implement that as well for the staff. So we don't do an 80%, 100% 4-day work week, but we do a condensed 4-day work week. So the way we do sort of full-time education, part-time education, we try and just make it as flexible as possible for people to fit their lives in and around work and work in and around lives. So yeah, it's been a super journey.
No, that's amazing, and that's bring the culture and the organization that you really want to work in. And maybe just in conclusion of this fantastic topic and discussion, what is your maybe positive message, because we have this tradition in the podcast to leave everybody with a warm and fuzzy feeling, and we talked about a lot of great stuff, but what's your final positive message?
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time at Capslock speaking with learners and sort of thinking about careers advice and how people can progress. And what always comes up is like a feeling of fear or a feeling of pressure when people are in an interview situation or a situation where they've been investigated. So, for example, a salesperson pitching whatever they're selling. So the advice I always like to give is when you go into these meetings and go into these situations where you're under pressure, is to go in with a mentality where you want to help the other person. So if you're going in for an interview, go in thinking, I want to help this organization, I want to help this particular hiring manager solve their problems. And if you use that mindset throughout your life in terms of I just want to help people, I want to, everything is about other people and not myself and how I feel, it really helps overcome things like fear and anxiety when you're going into high pressure situations.
No, that's brilliant. Jonathan, thank you so much for the time, the thoughts, and thank you for making a change both in cybersecurity and in the diversity field. I see you're really a champion in both worlds, so thank you for making the world a little bit easier to get into, the cyber world and the world a little bit more secure.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Everybody stay safe and learn more about Capslock. We're going to put all the information in the show notes. Everybody, goodbye. Stay safe.
See you later.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcast and post it on social media tagging Cybersecurity Cloud Podcast for a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card. Discover other episodes at www.cybersecuritypodcast.com.